I handed out a couple sheets. One is changes to the kneecap, and the other is our transition timeline. And we'll talk about those in a few moments. But I thought we could start out with sharing our findings about those 8 mathematical practices, the large group discussion that we postponed until after lunch. And so being a mathematical-minded person, order matters to me. And I know you know that. I color code things. I was really excited about the colored photocopies because I color code things, including my children. And Christmas gifts under the tree are color-coded. I need not ever label. They know which ones are theirs. It works out very swimmingly, I tell you. And so we're going to start with Math Practice 1. And so remember that the packet of worksheets that you have is a place for you to take notes, to write down, because you didn't have the opportunity to research these others. So now we're going to take the words of others to help us get a deeper understanding of these math practices. So, group 1.
So what does it look like and sound like? We had, the kids are in groups, working collaboratively. The teacher is, with us, we looked at an example, a high school geometry example, where the kids were taking sticks, pieces of paper that had holes in them, and they were making diagonals for quadrilaterals. So they could move these, they had a brad in between, so they could move the placement of the brad and they could move the diagonal so you could make different quadrilaterals. And it was a project that they did. And all that we saw in the clip was the teacher presenting the information. There was a company that was going to be making kites, and the kites were going to be using these particular sticks, and the kids had to decide what quadrilaterals the kites would be shaped like. So the kids were working in groups. We didn't see this, but we knew that they would have to. The teacher just set it up. The teacher was setting up the problem. The students needed to interact with each other, and we presumed at the end needed to present their findings to each other. There was a lot of brainstorming that was going to be needed, and there were manipulatives that were being used by the students, and the teacher presented how to use the manipulatives and what to do with them. Cartoons.
Well, students need in order to do this, they obviously needed some background knowledge. There was going to have to be some instruction that occurred before those types of projects. They needed to know the content. And because it was a group activity, they needed to have some kind of prior instruction on group norms, group rules, group procedures. And we talked about students having manners and compassion as they work through that process.
Implications for assessment. We spoke a little bit about how it would be sort of a change, for me anyway, as an individual, to assess kids doing group work. My kids do group work, but I don't usually count it as part of their grade. So that would be one change. You also would be able to create different assessments, maybe some that use higher order thinking skills, some that had long answers, as opposed to just giving a short answer, like to solve the equation, or even multiple choice. You'd have to move away from that to deeper questions. Yes.
Well, what teachers need in order to do this, they're going to need to have some kind of structure in the classroom. The kids are going to have to know, how they're supposed to proceed throughout the lesson. They're going to have to show some self-control, not just blurting out answers to the students. Try to have questioning skills, probing questions, things like that, to try to get the kids directed if they tend to stray off into different paths.
So the assessment piece in the grading, if you notice on your sheet, there are 2 separate boxes, and that was intentionally done because we need to step outside of the box of every assessment needs to be assigned a grade. Some of this work cannot be assigned a grade. How do I give a grade for talking in a group? And so what I'm hoping to do is think about formative assessment. I use it every day. even here working with you, I walk around and say, okay, I need to address this, or I need to mention this, or oh, they've already got that, I don't have to do this. So formative assessment, when we're looking at their skills for persevering in solving problems, doesn't necessarily mean I need to assign grades. And so when you're thinking about assessment and grading, you should be thinking in those two hats. That assessment can help inform instruction, and grading is a way that I'm reporting performance of students' learning and understanding. And so taking and separating for every assessment, I need a grade. And parents really struggle with this. Parents think everything I assign must be graded, and if it isn't graded, then why are you assigning it? And I know I hear those laughs. And you have to let them know that there's an opportunity to grow without getting graded, because I don't want my grade based on the very first time I tried something, because, oh my God, I'm not very good. That's why I practice, I get better. When I started playing the flute, they didn't just hand me the music and say, okay, now you're doing a solo, get out there. I spent a long time practicing, and I didn't get graded on every time I picked up my flute. I had to practice to get better. And so thinking of assessment and helping to convey that message to our parents is going to be really huge, is that I don't always have to assign grades for everything I'm assessing. And so assessment helps to inform what is happening in my classroom, as well as informing my students. So here's, you know, a little informal conversation we might have about maybe your attitude in the group. That's a form of assessment for that student. Okay? Thank you. Great math practice 2.
Other videos, we looked at both videos, and one of the ones we watched, the teacher had given a problem previously, and then handed the students work back to them without names on it. And they were in groups, so they looked at 2 different types of learners. They have learner A, learner B, and basically looking at the 2 different approaches students have taken. And you can all agree, it's kind of a good idea, kind of like use your students, how do they think about math? How are they looking at these problems, different approaches they took? So we had reasoning, and reason abstractly and quantitatively. And what does it look and sound like? Well, it's kind of interesting when talking about something that's abstract. But the teacher facilitates, and the students kind of problem solve together, and then compare and contrast their answers. So, okay, you learn differently, you learn differently. Is there something you can learn from each other? So that kind of idea on that. What will students need in order to do this? Obviously, they need some kind of prior knowledge before they get to that step. And we also kind of talked about when you have so many different learning styles and multiple intelligences and everything, they kind of need the freedom to learn it their way. And skipping right over to what the teacher needs to be able to accept that and kind of be able to show the problem in different ways, and also maybe show the answer in different ways. Multiple solutions to maybe different problems. And also to relate it to the real world problems. How is this actually going to apply once they get out of here? And actually pretty much the same thing for assessment and grading, as you were just saying. Can be very informal grading. Okay, you guys get the show of hands, and you guys are following me, you understand. Just giving a sense of your class. And implications for grading, standards-based grading. And the exact conversation of, okay, what do you do with, okay, parents who say, okay, what does meet mean? Is that a 90? Is that an 80? What exactly is that?
Very good. Group 3.
We have visuals, so since I'm taking the time to do that, I want to review it. Standard 3 is to construct viable arguments and critique reasoning of others. And the videos that we watched were very similar, I think, to the video that we saw earlier as a group this morning. So what does it sound like and what does it look like? They're working individually, and then they're asked to share with people in their group to explain their thinking. So it involves discussion, it involves questioning, it involves using some reasoning and logic, and then revising their answer based on some of the comments from some of their group members. Students need skills to be able to collaborate with their peers. We need some roles within the group, and they need some familiarity with Bloom so they can talk about, try to get to deeper thinking. The teacher needs to facilitate, and we talked about how easy it is to just take the pencil home and show them how to do the problem as opposed to try to get them to work through and understand the problem and do it themselves. So we also need to hone our questioning skills. So the implications for assessment, we need to be able, the students need to be able to explain and justify their answers. And we figure as far as the assessment and grading, tying that in, it's as important or more important to be able to explain how you got the answer as opposed to did you get the right answer. So we thought that that should probably be a separate piece on our grading rubric when we get to the standards-based grading. Also about students need to be able to analyze mistakes, which again is helpful as being able to just say the answers to.
Now we're on to group 4.
Modeling with mathematics. What does it look like and sound like? Students are exploring new concepts by having access to the previous knowledge and then also making connections with the previous knowledge, what's being learned, and applying it in real-world situations. Students are explaining their thoughts a lot. They have to explain out everything. What do they need in order to do this? They need the ability themselves to actually access the previous information, relate it to the new information, and apply it to the real-world situation. But they also need a classroom environment where it's okay to have a wrong answer. And they need their peers to be supportive of them, just like with Alvin in that video. Although I think they were starting to lose their patience with Alvin.
When they were
teachers
screaming, get it?
Yeah, exactly. You get it now? What do you want me to say? What will the teachers need? Training and practice on how to get students to think about what they're writing. They need to be able to help them with that. And also how to apply that in a real world situation. Implications for assessment. More open answer stuff with the students having the chance to make that explanation rather than just provide the answer. Projects, etc., can prove that the standard can be applied the same way that a test can, so thinking outside the box. And time for practice. The students are going to need that time to make those mistakes and to get better. Implications for grading. I also put standards-based, but if and when all stakeholders are ready. The teachers, the students, the parents, the community, all have to be ready to make that transition. And again, time for practice. Anything else?
I didn't hear that.
Probably putting more weight on the process instead of being primary.
Okay. Group 5.
Our standard was using appropriate tools, which is basically using manipulatives. If you look at the students we have now, they're mostly kinesthetic. So this is kind of an important standard I think for using with our students. What does it look like and sound like? There's group work. It's busy. It's not going to be quiet. Most of the time, you're seeing on-task work with little behavioral problems. They're creating models for problem solving by using, whether it's paper and pencil, or one group was using tiles, another group was using, they were making models of quadrilaterals with paper, different things like that. The teacher is a coach instead of being an instructor. What do they need? Manipulatives. They're usually with partners or in groups, and there are clear expectations about the behavior. And the teacher needs to model that behavior. That's very important. Provide the materials and very clear directions on what to do. Implications for assessment, we're looking at formative 2, and grading, looking at standard-based, giving them multiple experiences to use the standard before even assessing too. And it's funny, I'm listening to all the groups and they all sound the same. The answers are all the same, so it's just repetitious.
Well, good. I was hoping that would kind of start bubbling up, that we're hearing a lot of the same things. So group 6.
Okay, we had attention to precision, And this looks and sounds like an active classroom having an expectation of interaction from your students. There was one video kind of gave this example where you might distribute cards that have symbols on them or equations to each student and then tell them to get in groups. And then once, I mean, they don't know what the groups are for, so they have to do it themselves and then be able to justify why they put themselves in groups that way. So that's, I think, the big part is to justify it. They have to be able to talk about why they did things like that. The students will need to have a lot of attention to detail. They'll need to have confidence because with all of these, I think kids tend to not want to do it because they like the answer, they don't want to fail. So they'll have to have confidence because they're interacting so much. They'll have to trust and respect their teacher and their peers because they're working together so much. The teacher needs to focus on clarity and accuracy. They need to provide students with opportunities to do this, to work together, to interact with each other. They need to encourage and model it and provide a safe environment so that their kids feel okay talking with each other. For assessment, we said that they need to have complete thoughts. They need to be able to justify their answer and then use accurate units and labels for everything so that they're not missing things and that there won't be holes. And for the grading, we also talked about standards only. Just look at the standards and if that's an overall change of mind. So that's it.
One of the key pieces in this attention precision, when we think of precision, how many decimal places? How far out should I go? And it's not just about the accuracy of your answer, it's precision in your language and terminology when you're justifying your answer. And so vocabulary plays key under precision as well as, do I have the right units? Do I have the right labels? Am I out to enough significant digits? But also the vocabulary and terminology that I'm using in my explanations is part of precision. And I think it's really nice to finally have something out there in math that says it's about what we said. It's not just about that answer, it's about what we said. So, thank you. Group 7.
Can we get away with saying ditto?
Is there something different in yours? Tell us a little bit about what it was for the standard.
Ours was looking at structures and patterns.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's a lot of the same things. They're using manipulatives, they're drawing pictures to look for those patterns. And you hear a lot of the students talking through it. It's not just about getting the answers, how they're going to find it, how they're going to do that. What students need in order to do this? Students need clear expectations, time to think and process, group working skills, low stress environments, and they need the manipulatives. What will teachers need in order to do this? They need to take a step back and let the students think and talk. They need to provide the manipulatives, and they need to have, we talked about transitioning signals. She had, in one of the videos, they had a, the chimes, flipping that. I also wrote, because I heard Chad say, teachers we need professional development because we tend to teach how we were taught. So if we're going to model this, we should be comfortable being able to model this as well.
I agree.
For assessments would be more frequent and focus on teacher observations. Written assessments would be performance-based and contain very few extended responses. Okay.
Yeah. Extended responses. No, actually.
Oh, okay.
Never.
Implications for grading. Grading would be based a lot of rubrics would be implemented. Students would have maybe fewer grades, but it would be more of the detailed grading system.
Fewer but more meaningful. And then our final group. Group A.
We wanted to say ditto too, but
Standard 8 was look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. And I think that we have repeated reasoning for all of these, so that's kind of a good example of it. Students will be sharing different ideas. I think the teacher needs to accept all of the different ideas, not squelch anybody's answer. And then it's going to be up to the teacher to make the connections and show the students how, student A, student B, student C all said something different, but we can take something from all of them, and there are different ways to do it. What students will need this was spoken earlier too. I think they need the confidence and they need to feel safe to speak up, and they need to feel secure that when they do say something, it's not about being right or wrong, it's more about the fact that they're sharing and they're participating and they're actively engaged. And I think they will need classroom training so that they can do this. The video we spoke about, none of the kids used any negative words. They didn't seem to really be directed toward their peers. So that was really nice that they used really constructive criticism and kind words and kind we understood there. Teachers, we feel, will need lots of patience, as we do every day. Organization, we would need to have more in-depth knowledge of the concepts we're teaching as well, because as someone just said, we do tend to teach what we've learned, but just because it's the way we learn it isn't necessarily going to be the only way. So we've got to have the patience, we've got to have the knowledge to accept what the students are saying, and we can learn from our students as well. Implications for assessment, observation of active learning, classroom participation, on what everyone else said. Implications for grading, my first thought was how do you do it, just how? And you've got to change from the norm, and then how do you get your parents to buy into it, because they're so used to a certain way, and the way they did it, and what they're used to, so we've got to get our parents to buy into it and not, off it, the changes that we're doing for our students as well.
So these 8 practices are really honing in on this concept that it's time for a cultural change, a cultural shift in the way we look at mathematics, not just in how we do mathematics, but in how we grade and assess mathematics. So we're going to go past our break time slide because we already did that. So this is a slide I had put together that kind of sums up how to look at our target. And our target for learning is our standard. And I know in the world of No Child Left Behind, the assessment should be the target because that's what we're held accountable to, and the student scores and this, that, and the other. But if we keep the focus on the standard, the rest will fall in place. Because if they meet the standards, then the test will take care of itself. And so when I'm looking at a standard, I have to start looking at it at the grade level. So where in the grade level does this standard fit best? I don't want to teach it before they're ready for it. I don't want to teach it way beyond its time when I should have done it with a different unit or kind of cluster these things together. So I want to look at that grade and say, so where in this grade does this best fit for the students' understanding? Then I want to look in that K-12 continuum. So where does this fit in that progression over time? Is it, is this the appropriate grade for this to be done? And a lot of that work for whether or not it's in the appropriate grade has been done in the development of the Common Core standards. And so just knowing, is this a pivotal piece of information? Is this one of those major building blocks of foundational knowledge for that K-12 continuum? Where does it go? So if you think back to that progression document with the domains that I showed you, the different domains and how they're the building blocks to deeper understanding once you eventually reach that high school, and see where it fits in that progression. Then these math practices, when I'm looking at the standard, I have to think about the practices. So as my students are working in the standard, what practices are going to come into play? What will they be doing? How will they be interactively behaving with this standard, with this content? And what's the cognitive demand of the standard? What level of rigor am I asking for students to have with this standard? And then the pathways, and I'm not talking about like the pathways in the appendix, but the multiple pathways, the multiple solutions, entry levels into this standard for my students, because we know they're all not in the same place. As much as we try to get them all in the same place, not every student arrives there at the same time. And so do I have opportunities available for my students to enter this standard regardless of what level they're at? And how am I going to get them to that final target? And then that final piece is the assessment. That's the piece in the end. It's not what I start focusing on. It's that piece that says, okay, so how did we do with all of this? How did our work play out? So what we're going to do now is, before we started working on the problems that I brought, I wanted to get that sense of the mathematical practices and the interaction within mathematics that our students have, And I want to take a look at our current expectation for student performance and where we are headed for the expectation for student performance. And so what I've done for the middle schools, I put together a packet, and these are released items from the NECAP, grades 6 through 8. And then I've included Summative Assessment sample tasks that they have released. And I also included a question or two from the Illustrative math project site with Bill McCullum, which we'll go and visit later on. So you can get a sense of, here's what I currently am expecting of my students, and I try to match up the domains. You don't have these in your packet, so I see you guys looking for them. Because if I gave them to you, you would play with them. You know, I know that trick. Don't hand that stuff out while you're giving instructions, because they don't listen. And so, in your packet, though, you do have focus questions. And these are on yellow. And so there are 3 lenses I try to keep in mind as I'm working on problems, okay? And so the first lens is the first page, and it's looking at the math practices and the content standards. So I'm looking at a problem. These are kind of questions that I'm asking myself in relation to the expectation of the students. What content knowledge, what misconceptions, what practices might they involve? The second lens that I look at is technology. Is there some sort of technology that I can use that can help support student understanding? It's not an add-on. It's something that is not forced to fit, but is there something out there that can really make this dynamic for the students and really bring it to life for them? And start thinking about how can I integrate that in our instruction, so it's not, okay, today we're going to go down to the computer lab and we're going to play on this program, but I don't have a connection to the content that we're doing. We're just looking at a program. Instead, I want to be able to use that with the content and say, so how can this help my students see deeper into this problem? And then the third lens that I look at, and we have heard on the English language arts standards, they have these standards for the content literacy standards. Mathematics falls under content literacy standards for science and technical subjects. We are considered a technical subject. It used to say math, they took it off. I think it scared people. Technical subjects. But it's okay, because by doing that change, it kind of opened up the door for our career in technical ed courses as well, and other technical type subjects like health and things like that, where we want to think about literacy. Literacy in the math classroom. This is the key to unlocking content knowledge. How many times do my students begin working on a word problem and they're like, I don't get it, I don't get it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. We come over thinking we're helping and say, well, here, and you kind of read it over and you paraphrase it for them, and then they know what to do. It's not the content they were struggling with, it was the literacy piece of that problem they were struggling with. And so finding out the literacy needs that they're going to have to get into the problem is something I can do beforehand to make sure those tools are there for my students. So I don't have to run around and rephrase it so they can get to work because the words got in the way. And so taking it out of context for our students is helping them. Even though all those years I go back and apologize for the kids that I've done that for and not teach them the skills they really need, I would feel better. And so these are the 3 lenses that I use when I start looking at problems and what we're doing. So I have up here on the front table, closest to the door is the middle school packet, and closest to this wall is the high school packet. And so I have 3 copies of each, thinking that should be enough. So what I want you guys to come up, select what packet you want to work in, work together in pairs. It always starts off with the most recent, with the state NECAP assessment for the middle school. And for the high school, I have taken hot off the press this year's 3 sample test items, practice test items that are online available for all students to use. So at the SAT prep free of charge. And guidance counselors are using passwords for each of the students so they have access to go online and do practice tests. And so I went online and I took a couple problems from the practice test and printed them off and made sure I had permission to give them to you guys before I just started really looking things up. And so those resources are available. So as you're going through these problems in your groups, work with the questions, jot down some notes and some thoughts. Take a look at our current expectations with the NECAP or the SAT items, and then venture into the Smarter Balance items and the Illustrative Math Project items and see what the expectations of the Common Core are. And make some notes, and we're going to talk about what we found as we did this. Okay? So this is your time. Problems and looking at those questions so that in about 15 minutes, so around 1 o'clock, we can come back together and we'll talk first about the middle school problem set and then talk about the high school problem set and kind of share out some revelations, things that came up, and there's an aha here or oh my God there. It's really nice to hear the different conversations as I go around the room and looking at the different math problems, the way people approach them, and that variety is really nice to see and recognize. So we're going to start with the middle school packet, and we started off with NECAP items, and these were from the 6th grade with the patterns and things like that. This is our current expectation of performance for our students to be proficient with these topics. This is what we're asking of our students to be able to do. The second page was that cup of rice problem I had referred to earlier, working with fractions a little more in depth than what we're asking about for fractions in question number 3 on that front page. And then, of course, the grade 6 from the Smarter Balance with the tractor trailer truck and the cubes. And look at the dimensions. When I go back to NECAP, look at the dimensions of the shapes in NECAP. They're whole numbers. These are not whole numbers. Okay? And then we continue on to grade 7, and we're talking probability, so I gave a Smarter Balance item on probability at the grade 7 level. The difference of the expectation for understanding, and then grade 8. And I'll tell you, I think this last item from Smarter Balance for grade 8 had the biggest reaction of all. And can you share what yours was?
My oh my God reaction?
Yes, your oh my God reaction.
Well, just the vocab. You read the problem, or I read the problem, and I went, wow, reasoning to justify or refute the conjecture.
The vocabulary refused the conjecture. And you know, you talk about vocab. Vocab is huge. When you take math, if I think of math as a science, it's a study of patterns and relationships. It's a science. And so not only am I thinking now in terms of math as a science, I can investigate and explore, but then it has a language all unto itself. I do not walk down the street and point out the octagon at the end of the road. I say, look at the stop sign. I don't walk down the sidewalk and say, check out all those prisms. I point to the buildings. But in my math classroom, I'm talking about octagons. I'm talking about prisms. And my students are making these connections, that that's what these things are. And so I need to teach a foreign language in my classroom because that's what we're doing. So we have a science, we have a foreign language. And vocabulary is really key. If you go into a science classroom and you're starting a lab, the very first thing the teacher says, write down your hypothesis. Well, guess what? In math, why aren't I saying write down your conjecture? Because that's my mathematical hypothesis. How come I'm not starting my activities the way my science teacher does and say write down your conjecture? What do you think is going to happen in this problem? What do you think the answer is going to be before I even begin working? And so if we start looking at it, if we start talking those words with our students and using them like second nature, it will become that way for them. Think about your foreign language classes when you're immersed in the language and you have to figure it out and get it. So let's immerse them in this language of mathematics and have a word wall, but don't you put up the words. If you put up the words, it's just a list of words on the wall. But if my students have to earn the right, the privilege to put that word on the wall because they've owned it, because they've been able to use it correctly during class discussion, they've used it correctly during their work when they're writing their justifications, they can then write the word on the little sticker or whatever you use and put it on the word because I know this word and I own this word. And so have them create the word wall, not you. Because then if I put the words up, it's just a list of things we're going to talk about here. But if I have to know it, to put it up there, and what kid doesn't want to put a word on the wall? Then I have to work for it. And when you do it that way, you're not going to tell the kids whether or not they've used it right. The rest of the students are going to tell them, no, you can't put that word on the wall because you didn't use it right. So, any other things jump out about this middle school packet? Anything anyone wants to share about it? So we know vocab a little bit deeper, using more elaborate numbers. How about high school? High school, we started that very first page. This is an SAT question, believe it or not. This is an SAT question, and students don't get it. So then the next came from the Illustrative Math Project site, which is very similar to the SAT question, but a little more challenging because there's no line. They have to draw the line. So instead of saying, here's a line of symmetry, which other letters have this line of symmetry? Here's two objects. Where is the line of symmetry? A little different take. And then we have some smarter balance. Looking at airlines, who do you want to fly right now? No one. I always seem to have, bad travel karma, so I'm told. No one wants to travel with me in the office because flights get delayed, luggage doesn't get delivered. And then again, I continued through looking for, and at the bottom you'll see whether it's SAT, at the top it says illustrative, and then of course the smarter balance. So anything jump out from the high school? Any aha moments about what you're currently doing, the current expectation of where we're heading? What do you think? Do you think your kids can do this? I think we're okay. So we'll move on. I'm hoping that this was a way to get you to step outside the box and look at things differently. I provided a copy of this on your desk with the transition timeline on your tables for implementing the Common Core. So 2010-11 was our year of study. The documents came out. We have 300 pages for mathematics. There's 500 for ELA. Last year, look at your curriculum and instructional practice alignment. And for math, I was really pushing to implement those 8 mathematical practices. If I could get those practices in play and under my belt before I start switching curriculum around, I think it would be an easier task. But you know, this is me personally. What I say doesn't mean you have to do it, but those were my thoughts of how I would go about doing this. So this current school year, start shifting our curriculum and instructional practices. Take a look at what's moving up. Let go of what's moving up. Take a look at what's going down. Hang on to it until next year. So 2013-14, I'll do that final push of what's going down, knowing things are coming down, and I'll be fully aligned. 2014-15, you should be at the latest for full alignment to Common Core, because that's the year we do our next assessment through Summative Assessment. That is the year we will be assessed on the Common Core state standards. It's 2014-15 school year. So if you are not fully implemented and instructing, then they're going to miss that target for sure. So the state assessment, what does it look like? So fall 2012, which is right now, we have the kneecap going on. And in the spring, we do the SATs for the high school. Next year, the fall 2013, we're going to be doing the kneecap. And you have a chart. There are no changes to ELA, but there are changes to the math. And we'll talk about that in just 1 second. And then 2014 in the spring, we'll do the SATs. School year 2014-15, all grades, 3 through 8, and the high school will be doing the Smarter Balance Assessment in the spring. So for the middle school, elementary and middle school, we're going to go from fall testing to spring testing, which is a shift. And it will be over the current year's learning, not the previous years. Right now, kneecap, if I'm in 4th grade, I'm being assessed on 3rd grade standards because it's taking place in October. And so in that 2015 administration, it's going to be over that current year, current grade level that my student is sitting in. So the changes that are going to happen, yes?
For the high school, will they be testing grades 9, 10, 11, and 12?
Just that one grade again.
11.
Yep.
Because it said for all grades.
Thank you, I will fix that.
No, because I was confused. Does it? For all grades.
Yeah, I will fix that, thank you. It doesn't matter what course they're in. Yep. So for the kneecap, you can see the hardest hit grades are grades 5 and grades 7. And the decision has to be agreed upon by 4 states. Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Vermont all administer the kneecap. And so all 4 states have to agree as to what was going to change for this kneecap. The decision was made, if the standard is moving up grade level, we will not assess it. Because if we are transitioning and we've shifted our curriculum, then those students, if I've moved that standard up, those students will not have been instructed on it. So what you see up there is a list of standards by grade as to what will not be assessed because that has moved up grade level. The standards that have moved down grade levels, we're leaving where they are. Because even if you've shifted and moved down, they've been instructed on that standard. So we only wanted to address that gap of instruction if I've shifted and it's moved above the level at which it will be assessed, currently being assessed.
I'm hearing the word, when you're saying up or down, are you saying so if, for these things that are not going to be tested on grade 5?
Yes.
Like 4-4, 4-5, does that mean?
They're above the 4th grade level. They're being,
They're taught in grade 5 now instead of grade 4?
in the Common Core, or even higher.
Okay.
So some have moved up a grade or up 2 grades.
Okay.
Okay? And so where there's the possibility that some students, because we're all in that system of implementation and transitioning, and we're all in different places here in the state of Maine, imagine across all 4 states where we all are. And so we decided that we needed to come out with this as soon as possible so that the field would know these are the decisions that were made, so one less thing to stress about when you're looking at shifting your curriculum. Any other questions on this change in kneecap?
Michelle?
Yes.
I don't think your mic is on anymore.
It says it's on, maybe my
Battery.
technology
That might be the battery.
is working.
Nobody can hear you, but give me a strain on your voice if you get something.
Nope.
Not better?
It wasn't me, it's bad.
The battery.
I have a question.
Yep.
If we're testing for the current year, aren't we just going to fall back into that same situation we had with MEAs being tested in March and our kids?
We're not being. I don't need my
But
teacher
if we're
voice.
testing for that current year,
The test isn't going to be delivered in March. It's going to be the last 12 weeks of the school year.
okay, so we can
There's
push
the
that
testing
where
window,
we need to
yes.
push it, and then we don't have to worry too much about our kids being tested on something that they wouldn't typically see until May.
Correct. Correct. Because it will, thank you. It will happen at the end of the school year. Okay? Good question. Good question. Same for the high school. Yep. The end of the year. So, I know we have we have an hour and 45 minutes until 2:30. And what I wanted to do was to give you a tour of some resources and really take some time to look at these so that you can go in. And here's where the middle school teacher in me comes out. Once you get there, bookmark it. And I used to walk around my room and say, is that bookmarked? I want to see your bookmark. Because some of these aren't the easiest ones to get to. There's long ways to find them. The URLs aren't very short. And so once you get there, if you bookmark it, you know you'll always be able to go back. And then I'll go through these rather quickly and then show you different things, give you some time to go play around and explore what's there for resources. Because one of the things that we don't have is time. And so if we can take some time out of today to look at resources so you can start thinking about what's there that I can use, what's missing so you can tell me so that I can find it and put it there for you. And if it isn't out there, maybe I can make it. Yeah, that's a whole other nightmare, right? And so the first one that I have is my web page. And so this is my web page. This is the home page. All of the content areas have a web page at the department. And you can get to any other content area page simply by using the specific content area tabs. So I'm going to take you to the math standards. Notice there are only 2 buttons up there. There are the Common Core State Standards and the NECAP standards. The main learning results. Common Core for mathematics, basically what we did when we adopted them, and we did this for math and for ELA only. We opened up that document for the learning results, kind of reached in, took those math standards, pulled them out, and dropped the Common Core in their place. Okay? And we did that for ELA. All other content areas are still the learning results. The guiding principles are still in place for everyone. But instead of having Common Core, NECAP, and main learning results, I have Common Core and NECAP. The NECAP standards are our assessment standards. When we do that last administration of the NECAP standards, that button will disappear too. Because then we'll only be focusing on the Common Core. And so if you think about opening up the learning results where it says math in our nice little purple book, or actually we've updated it now and you have to print off your own, and just take those math standards and replace them with the Common Core. That's all we've done. So the Common Core have become our learning results for math and for ELA. Okay? So if I click here on the Common Core button, it's a big document. So there's a first steps, give you some idea of how to go about studying the Common Core, the standards themselves. You can get the entire document. The one with the linked reference is I can click on highlighted items within the document, even though it's a PDF, and it will go to that page. And so I'm not scrolling through this huge document looking for something. I can click on it and it will take me there. So that's one I would download onto my desktop. Then we have the individual standards by grade, and I'm really hoping when you look at these, you don't look just at your grade, you look above and below, so you know where they're coming from and where they're heading to. If I don't know where they're coming from, how can I identify gaps? Because I don't know what the expectations were. And if my students are doing really, really well, how do I challenge them if I don't know where they're going to? Over here, these are progression documents. This is different than the one that I provided with the large domains. And so if I take a look at the 3-5 progression document, these are the individual standards by domain and how they relate to each other across that 3-5 continuum. So this is another resource to help you as you're looking at your curriculum. High school, we have the conceptual categories. A really interesting thing for modeling, there are no standards in modeling. Modeling is one of those standards that is naturally embedded in all the other conceptual categories. And it is identified with that little asterisk, with that star symbol, that when you're doing this standard, say in functions, you're also doing a modeling standard, because I can't deal with functions unless I'm modeling it. I model it through graphs, through data tables, through equations. So they decided, instead of listing modeling standards, we're just going to identify them with this star. And down here is the appendix, where it breaks out the course pathways. And remember, these are suggested pathways. It's not what we're saying you have to do, but it's a great place to start your conversations. And there's also in here, Introduction to High School Mathematics and Middle School. It's really great talking points for parents. Why are we accelerating students in the middle school? What's the reasoning behind it? And what are other alternatives instead of pushing them through courses? What can we do? So some really good talking points. And then there's some information about English language learners and students with disabilities. If I scroll back up, this Learn More, this is going to take you to my professional development page. This is everything that I've done so far across the state of Maine with professional development around the Common Core. I've tried really hard to take the workshops that I do and put them on this web page. And I have them in modules. The ELA page is set up the same way with the same 3 modules: the introduction, the alignment, and implementation. We thought, especially for our elementary teachers who have to do it all, they're not just trying to implement math standards, they're also trying to implement the ELA standards as well. And so they have a huge order in front of them. And if we could mirror our professional development so that if they knew how to navigate one site, they can navigate the other and find the resources they need, it would be most beneficial for the teachers. So as you go through, in the beginning, this talks about the development of the Common Core and where it came from. Talk about alignment and how we're not doing a standard to standard, and that we want to do that practice to standard that I talked about earlier today. What am I currently doing? What am I not doing? Here's where we have those 3 progression documents that I referred to. The first one, the math progression table, is the handout that you have. The 3-5 domain is what I just showed you. And then the others are narratives, where they get into talking about developmentally, where are your students at this age or this grade level? What does that look like, and how does it evolve over that continuum? The implementation, this is the activity that you did this morning with the mathematical practices, with the links to the video vignettes from Inside Mathematics. This is where we talk about, now that I've done work with the math practices, let's look at the content standards and see which practice is bubbling up in each of these content standards, so that I have a sense of what I'm looking for in student behavior as I'm going in through the instruction of the standards with my students. The critical focus areas, these are the narratives that are in front of the grades. And also, if you go to Appendix A, they have a narrative description in each of the courses. And so it's basically, you create a deck of cards, you have the critical focus areas, and now you're aligning the standards to these critical focus areas. And you'll find that some fit in more than one focus area, and I've dubbed these my bridging standards, because that's the bridge that I'm going to use to carry prior knowledge from one unit to the next to show my students how it's connected. And if I can identify them and start thinking about building my unit and my curriculum around these focus areas, it's a beginning. It's the way I can start looking at my curriculum. Questions about those two parts of my web page? There's multiple layers to the web pages, unfortunately. So I have this resource tab. Let's see how. This first one takes us to the page we were just at with the PD that I've done in the state. The additional resources. This is a list of resources that are nationally developed. Not developed by me personally, but nationally developed. The Common Core State Standards Initiative. This is the link to Summative Balance, and we'll go back there. The Common Core Mathematics Common Core Coalition, affectionately known as MC3. This is the national math organizations with the assessment consortium working to develop resources for the field based on the Common Core. And so they have some really interesting things at their website. The videos where we listened to Bill McCullum and Jason Zimba, the Hunt Institute videos. This is a link to those. The Inside Mathematics, where you went to investigate the mathematical practices. The Illustrative Math Project sample tasks that I provided to you in the handouts. These are the standards by domain, and then progression documents. Curriculum analysis tool, it's a 3-part tool for looking at your current materials that you're using. How does it align to the Common Core? Somewhat cumbersome. If you really know your materials that you are using, this tool is an effective tool. If you're not familiar with the materials that you're going to be looking at, so if you're looking to purchase a new product and you haven't worked with it, this may not be the best tool for you to use. There's a new one that has just come out, and I'm going to go down next month for some training in how to use that analysis tool. And when I come back, I'll have more information, and I'll put some postings on the web page for that. So let's go to the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortia. It is, and I'm looking to see. Okay. So the sample tasks that you have, this is a good place to go to keep up to date on what's going on with Smarter Balance. We have a group of teachers. We have item writers and item reviewers in the state of Maine. Governing states, Maine is a governing state to the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, which means we have a voice at the table. And governing states were offered the opportunity to have classroom teachers become item writers and item reviewers for this next assessment. And so we have a handful of teachers in the states who are fulfilling those roles for the state of Maine. So each of the governing states were allowed, I think, 8 for the writers and 8 for the reviewers. And that's across those grade spans that we're assessing. So in order to get the task that I shared with you, this Smarter Balance Assessment, I'm not going to pick any of the drop-down menus. I'm just going to click on the tab itself. So on this page, there's a lot of information talking about what you need in order to give this assessment for the components, because this is going to be online. This is computer-based, computer adaptive. This is all going to be delivered online. They talk about the different components, the summative assessment, which we will be doing at the end of the school year. There's an optional interim assessment where districts can purchase the opportunity, they can purchase the ability to create your own sample summative assessment that you can give to your students during the school year. That's something each individual district will decide if they purchase. When the state purchased that summative package, you get the summative assessment, and you also get the formative assessment practices here, where I can go online and I can use some sample tasks throughout the school year with my students as we're doing our instruction. And so this is a good place for me to check and see, so how are we doing? Do my students understand this? Do we need to do a little more work here and there? And so that will be available at no charge to all of the teachers across the state, because that's part of the package we get with that summative piece. So there'll be some formative assessment built right in for us to use in our classrooms. Content specifications. So what is it that they're looking at assessing? What is the content that we're going over? And the item specification documents. As you scroll down under item specification, you see there's this file that says mathematics grades 3-5, and it has zip in parentheses. Those are folders, zip folders, with all of the assessment tasks that I've shared with you. And so they do them by grade span. And then within that folder, they have it by claim 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can take that folder and download it onto your desktop and then unzip it, and you will have those tasks and there's more documentation with those tasks rather than just the question that I showed you. It talks about what claim it's assessing, it talks about what standards they're assessing, including the math practices, and any prior knowledge students need to have in order to do that task. And so there's a lot of metadata that goes with those tasks. And then, of course, they show you the rubric in which it will be graded against. And so there's a lot of information there. The newest piece from Summative Balance, released this week, if I go to the sample items and performance tasks, and they are looking for feedback on these items. And so this is a sample of what your students will see on their assessment. And so here they're saying, I have 5 swimmers, they did a 50-meter race. Here's the finish times. Explain how the results of the race would change if the race used the clock that rounded to the nearest tenth rather than the nearest hundredth, and the students have to type in their response. If I want to take a look at, and these are going by grades, the grade spans, I can select the different problems based on the grade span. I can also come over here and about this item, and it gives me information about the item, and I can look at the rubric on how it's going to be scored. Or I can just go through the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and take them all myself. And so also up here they're saying, feedback and support, you can give them a call or you can send them an email with feedback about these items that you're reviewing and looking at. So this next site, the Illustrative Mathematics Project, you can hear it as illustrative or illustrative. I've asked which way, and they said it depends on what part of the country you come from, but either one will work. And so this is where I have the sample items in your packet from as well. So if I want to take a look at the K-8 standards, I'll click here. I can choose to look at them by grade. I can choose to look at them by domain. So if we take a look at grade 7, if I reveal all standards, it will automatically show me the standards. Anything that has in parentheses, see illustrations, this is where those sample tasks are put in. Notice this is at the cluster heading level, these illustrations, not at the individual standard level for that particular one. So if I click on, it will give me the task, which some of you have seen. I don't think I picked this one. And it gives you the solution, gives you more options for solutions, commentaries, and you can give feedback on these tasks as well. If I want to print this off and use in my students, I can download the PDF and do that. And we do the same with the high school. Say I want to look at algebra. Notice there aren't any grades because we don't do it by grade. We do it by conceptual category up at the high school. I think I've gone too fast for it. There we go. And so again, anything that has in parentheses, see illustrations, there will be sample tasks that you can use in your classroom that are aligned either to that cluster heading or to the individual standard. There's information over here. You can actually write items and submit them. And they'll go through a review process and you'll get feedback if they ask you to change a few things and have it aligned, and then they'll post your question on this website. So that's another way that you can be involved. You can start rating these. You can give feedback on the ones that are already existing. So my email address is my first name dot last name at maine.gov. Please note there's only one L in Michelle, not two. If you put two L's, it will bounce back to you and I will never hear what you asked me. And it's not that I'm ignoring you. I try really hard not to. The other available resource, which is a new one for me, these are Note Share notebooks, and these are very lengthy URLs, and I apologize for that. These will soon be posted on my webpage so you can have direct links. NoteShare is a program on the Macs with the Milties, and I wanted to have that interactive set of standards. I didn't want to take that book and put it on the shelf or use it to level off my overhead projector anymore. I wanted it to be a part of what I do. I wanted to have it available for my planning, for instruction. And so these notebooks, I've taken the Common Core State Standards, copied and pasted them into these notebooks. So in the 6-8 notebook, I have grade 6 through grade 8 standards, but everything else from the Common Core document is in this notebook. So we start with an overview. This is the introduction, the beginning of the Common Core State Standards. And what I've done is wherever it was appropriate, and there was a resource that talked about this part of the document, I put in a live link. So you can hear from the words of the developers who was involved with developing these standards. It will take you out to those Hunt Institute videos. My purpose here was to think of this as a book study approach to the Common Core State Standards. So back in my department, I could have my PLC do a book study of the Common Core State Standards and use the NoteShare notebooks, and we start in the beginning, just like you do in a regular book. You start in the beginning, you start with the introduction, and you go through and you read the introduction and you do the embedded professional development activities. as you go through this book study. And so here you would have all of the materials and information and the PDFs for the documents that you're going to be working with to get a deeper understanding of the Common Core standards. And I have them by the introduction, the standards. So the activity that you did today is in here. And also, I've included this little poster. It's 8.5 by 11. You can print it out for Math Practice 1. Hang it up in your classroom. You don't have to use that one. That's one I found that I like. There's more out there if you Google and look. People are coming up with their own design. But that was one that I thought was kind of cute, so I included it. Then when we continue on in the book, we get to the standards and we start with the grades. And this is that beginning, that narrative, and they talk about the critical focus areas, and here are your critical focus area cards so that you can print them out, cut them up, and do the activity and start thinking about developing your curriculum around these focus areas. There's always worksheets to record your thinking. So with that, I'm going to give you some time to start exploring some of these resources that I shared with you so that you can give me some feedback, ask some questions. If there's other things you're looking for, I'll come around to the tables and I can help direct you towards that. I don't know if you want to do a talk now or wait for a little bit later.
I can probably make some announcements just in case people have to trickle out.
Okay.
But, okay. Use a microphone. It's easier. Since we're all going to be working sort of individually in groups for the next period of time, I'm not sure, and I know some of you have a longer trip than others. So before you leave, I want to make a few announcements. First of all, I want to take a moment to thank Michelle for coming up from the Department of Ed, for helping us with this. I think she deserves a round of applause. This is a great start to our partnership, and I'm sure that we'll have more opportunities for shared professional development in the future. Everybody gets a certificate, because I know how important those are. And so they're in alphabetical order on the table outside as you walk out. Don't walk out now, though. I know we have some more sharing to do. I also would like to ask, we're trying to be green, if you would like to recycle your name tag, please put them in the box on the way out. We can reuse those. I don't think these are brand new either, I'm not sure, but we really appreciate that. And there is an evaluation. I know Michelle's going to run you through that on her, you'll be doing online. It's a Survey Monkey. I'll have her describe that. There is also a paper evaluation. I did that before I got your email. So you don't need to do both. So Merry Christmas, I gave you some scrap paper on the paper one. And I'd like you to fill out Michelle's on the Survey Monkey, and she's going to share the outcomes with me, so I don't know how that turned out. So instead of doing it twice, we'll just do it once online. I'd appreciate that. Any questions at all about anything else? I think we're all set. And I'll let you continue the workshop. Thank you all for being here. I know some of you drove all the way as far as Holton. That's quite a trudge up north. And we will be keeping in touch with your schools in the future as we do more of these kinds of workshops to get people ready. So I was very excited to see some of our students here, some of our faculty. So we're looking forward to the future. So thank you very much, everybody.
So my plan is for us to spend the next 20-25 minutes exploring the resources that we have online, and then come back together and maybe talk about the ones that you think are most useful, or maybe there's others that you found, and like I said, I'll stop by at each, and then any burning questions that you have left remaining for me, and then we'll be done for the day.
I'm so excited. Thank you.
Everybody, can I have a moment of your time before everybody leaves? We have a member of our faculty in education who would like to say just a few words about something that's happening on our curriculum that may affect or involve some of you. So, Paul Grant.
I am currently adjunct faculty here at UMFK. I look around the room and probably 25% I've taught. Another 20% I've taught with, and a few more that I principled along the way. Just a couple of words on what's going on with the education department here at UMFK. A major transition is taking place. Instead of teaching 60 credits and in education, 23 credit courses, we've moved to 15 4-credit courses. The 4th credit in each 15 courses is mostly aimed at field experience. So we're going to be coming to you in 2 ways. First of all, please invite our students into your classroom for these field experiences. Realizing that the field experiences that they're going to be doing in the future are going to be focused. So if they're in my math class, they're going to be coming to your math class looking at teaching techniques and what's going on in math. And the reading class the same way, and the other classes that they're taking, if it's a classroom management class, they're going to be focused on the classroom management aspect of what's going on in your class, as opposed to coming in a general means. I know some of you from Houghton, you're not going to see the on-campus students, but you may see that Houghton student that's returning home for a vacation, and he may be doing part of his field experiences in his hometown schools. The other thing that we need will be, we will need coordinators for these field experiences for the different classes. And the university will be looking for some new people to step up and work as the coordinator for the mathematics field experience or the writing field experience or whatever class they happen to be involved in. There are 10 classes this fall, so there are 10 different labs involved going on concurrently. And this is a new transition, so they're just getting this thing set up at this point. So we would greatly appreciate if your approach that you would step up and help us with these matters, and that you would indeed welcome the students into the classrooms so that they can get that valuable field experience and the idea of how do we teach this and what is going on in a classroom. Thank you.
So I'm looking at the clock, and I know we were supposed to be here till 2:30, but I'm thinking I will stay here till 2:30 for those of you who wish to continue exploring resources. Before I say you're good to go, if that's okay with you, Scott.
Oh yeah.
Are there any final questions that you might have for me? Suggestions, questions, concerns that I can take back to my little cube and work out for you? That's where I get to. I live in a cube, so. Hearing none, I'll take that as a good sign, maybe, or you're just done. So thank you very much for having me up. I really, really enjoyed it, and I appreciate your attention up through this long